I need to catch up with some of my book reviews, and the first one I'm going to get to is The Long Voyage, published by John Christopher in 1960. It's known as The White Voyage in the United States. And the quick conclusion is, if you don't have time to watch the whole video, this is a great adventure story, a kind of thriller adventure story. It's not science fiction in the grand tradition of some of his other books, but it's very well written and it's certainly worth your time. So on to the details. A little bit about John Christopher. John Christopher was actually Sam Yaud. I didn't know this until recently, and I thought based on his name that this might be a foreign name, but it isn't. It's an oldie English Cheshire name, so he is definitely from the United Kingdom, and he's most famous for me, the Tripod trilogy, which is now a tetralogy. I read that when I was a young boy, and then much later, I didn't realise he was the same author. I read The Death of Grass, which is his famous adult dystopian novel, and I thoroughly recommend that. And I've got a review of it. I've got a review of it in the shorts if you want to check it out. So please do, because it's a classic book, and everybody who likes science fiction or even dystopian fiction or just fiction should probably read that. It's not without its problems, but it's still a very good book. So let me read the blurb on the back of this book, because it gives you a taste of what you'd be getting into if you did decide to read this book. Ship of Doom. The portents are ominous as the Craier sets sail from Dublin to Copenhagen. Bad weather, discontent among the crew, suspicion and secrecy among the passengers. Then, in mountainous seas, disaster strikes, a great storm, a rudder smashes beyond repair, a mutiny, and suddenly passengers and ship's officers are left helpless on a drifting ship at the mercy of the ocean, driven inexorably north by wind and tide towards the most terrible ordeal of all. And interestingly enough, I'll tell you at the end, this book reads very much like another book, a non-fiction book that I read almost immediately before this one, just by chance. And when I looked up the publication dates, I'm sure that there must be a connection between the two. But let's have a description of what this is about. It's essentially a story of, it's not so much a passenger ship as a freighter, and it's carrying a cargo mainly of horses that are due to be sent to a knacker's yard, made into glue. And it also has a small number of passengers. It has a circus family with a bear that comes on the boat. It has a woman with a child who's going to meet a new husband in Denmark. And it has an eloping couple. And then it has the crew. And it starts out on the wrong foot for me, because the story focuses on a particular crew member and his belief in omens and luck. And it gives you the impression that the story might be have some kind of strange, otherworldly, spiritual something or other in it, because this is what this particular character in the story is interested in. And it isn't. That's a red herring, and you shouldn't let it put you off, or if that's the kind of thing you like, you'll be disappointed. In fact, it's a pretty much straight up adventure of this ship. It loses its rudder, it drifts, and it drifts far north into the Arctic ice pack. And at the same time that all this is happening, we have a mutiny, and the character who opens the novel, this particular person who has these, I mean, I would say almost occult beliefs. There's a spoiler coming up, but this isn't completely spoiler free. He gets his comeuppance, and so he's no longer part of the story. although he plays a role in the way that the story develops, obviously. And then the remaining crew members and the passengers have to adapt to their changing and worsening situation as the story proceeds. And towards the end, it gets pretty tough for them. And this is the point at which I was thinking to myself, the description of what happens up there in the north, in the Arctic, on the ice pack, it was really ringing bells in my mind of another book that I literally just read. And that book was Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. And that was published in 1959, 1 year before John Christopher's Long Voyage was, or White Voyage if you're in America. And the descriptions of what happened in the Arctic really ring a bell and resonate with what happened to Shackleton and his men at the other pole of the world, in the Antarctic, where they were trying to survive the sinking of the Endurance because it got caught in the ice pack and was crushed. And the same thing happens to the boat in Christopher's novel. It gets caught in the ice pack and they abandon it, and then they face some of the problems and challenges that Shackleton faced in reality, except Shackleton's adventure is truly astonishing. The one described in this book is very entertaining, and it's a good read, and it's short too. It's 188 pages, so it's not. It's, you know, some of you could probably knock it off in a sitting. I could just about manage it in a week. It's a nice quick read, and it's well written. He's a good writer. Although I'll do a quick tangent here. I read his second book, which I believe is called, I can't remember what it's called. It's called Planet in Peril, at least I think it is in the United States, and it's absolutely awful. I had to DNF it. I got 2/3 of the way through because he wrote it, and I love John Christopher, and it's atrocious. And I promise I'll finish it, and I'll even review it, but it is bad, and it's a piece of science fiction, but it's terrible. This is not, I should emphasize, this is not a piece of science fiction, although it was written, as I say, in 1960, but it hasn't dated. I must say it hasn't dated. There are one or two places where you might say, well, why didn't they just use sat-nav? But it kind of explains, at least for the technology they had at the time, why they can't locate where they are. And you don't sit there reading it going, yeah, but they could just look at their phones and then they would know, because they could just use the sat nav. That's not a problem. It isn't dated. I would say, if I was going to be really critical about it, and I should be, because I shouldn't be a fanboy, the stories of some of the passengers are a little bit cliched. We have the eloping couple who are escaping some financial shenanigans, and we have the woman who doesn't want to fall in love with one of the crew members, and so there's a love interest. And then there's this bear on the ship, and you get quite attached to the bear. Oddly enough, it's a circus bear, and it belongs to the circus family. And the bear comes in peril from the captain, who is well portrayed. The captain Eric Olsen, all of the crew. I think there's some Irish in the crew, but they're mainly from Denmark, which is interesting. I don't know why Christopher chose that. Before I knew that Joud was a good, strong English name, I thought he might have come from somewhere in Europe, maybe even Denmark. So I'm not quite sure why he chose Denmark as the origin for the crew. But anyway, the captain is well portrayed and an interesting character. and he has to make tough decisions, and he looks long and hard at the bear at various points in the story. And I must admit, I was thoroughly behind. I think Nadja is the young woman who is the bear trainer. I was with the Nadja and the bear in those exchanges between them and the captain, and so I thought that was cleverly done by Christopher, that he should have me on the side of ungulate throughout the story. And the resolution at the end is good. I must say that once we get up into the Arctic, the story does get pretty exciting. But it does, as I say, it has very strong echoes of the story of the Endurance, which I would also thoroughly recommend. Maybe I should review that book as well. That really is. It's because it's just such a stunning story. And that book is based on their diaries, and it's difficult to believe how all those men survived, that they all got back, and that the worst thing that happened was that one of the men had to have, I think, some toes and some fingers amputated from frostbite. It's stunning that nobody else had any more injuries than that. Anyway, so my conclusion about The Long Voyage by John Christopher is that it's not science fiction, it's just a straight up adventure. But if you're interested in John Christopher and you've read his other books, you will enjoy this one because he's such a great writer. And if you haven't read any John Christopher, this one is quite a reasonable one to start with, but it's not science fiction. And if I was going to recommend one of his science fiction books, it would really have to be The Death of Grass, even though the beginning of that really is dated. It really feels 1950s. Another good book of his that you might try if you like kind of collapse, kind of near future collapse, is Pendulum. That's very good. And also The World in Winter, which is another very good book. And I'll review those. I actually reviewed Pendulum on my website. If you wanted to go to my website, which is full of lots of interesting goodies, book art, there's music there, and as I say, there's reviews, and there's a review of Pendulum there. I'd be delighted. But that's it for the moment, and hopefully I'll come up with more book reviews in the coming year. All the best. Bye.